Okay, so the reason that I'm dressed up like this is because I'm making a video about what's happening with Wall Street English. And I worked at Wall Street English for 5 years, so it's a pretty long time. And I did a lot of overtime, so I probably really worked at Wall Street English for like a lot longer than that. I spent a lot of time in that company, inside the centers, and teaching students all over Tianjin and all over Qingdao. Now, what I have to talk about today is basically the crash or the decline of Wall Street English. And I've got some materials here. So these materials are from a meeting. I have a pretty good source from inside the meeting. So I just thought that some people might be interested, because when you've worked in a company for a long time, it's very hard to just like forget about it. Like I've had a couple of people say, I don't care about that anymore, but then they end up talking to me about it for an hour. And look, I have mixed feelings about it all, but I just want to get into it now. And a big part of my channel, I wanted my channel to really be like a tree with two branches, or like a river with two forks. And one fork I wanted to be about China and showing how beautiful China is and how wonderful the Chinese people are. And the other fork I wanted to be about being an English teacher, teaching English in China and so on. So I wanted to cover some news stories. This is a big news story. Wall Street English is a big news story. Now, I've got the information here, so let's just get into it. A little bit of context. The ESL market was hit hard by COVID-19, and I don't think it gave anybody any pleasure. It gave me no pleasure. I had some really tough months, I think, like a lot of people did. And I had a friend who lost his school. I had a couple of friends who lost their jobs. And Wall Street English was hit really hard. They were hit especially hard because their buildings are in prime locations. So the rents on those buildings were very, very high. Having 4 months, 5 months, 6 months in 2020, with their centres being closed, it was really a miracle, in my view, that they were able to survive that. But they did survive that. Now, what happened? There was a change in ownership. So they went from being owned by Barings Bank and Bank of China International. Sorry, pardon me. CITIC International, which is a bank that Deng Xiaoping set up. Anyway, I don't know the ins and outs of that, but I do know that they were jointly owned by two banks. They went back to private ownership. So the original founder, who is an Italian guy who established Wall Street English, Peke, as they call him, he basically either bought the company in China or he invested a lot of money in it. So this is going back to July 2020. Now, in July 2020, I guess there was a sense of optimism, because everybody assumed that the market would just come back. And I guess that was probably not realistic. But Peke had been successful. He had the Midas touch, and he had grown the company in China. So there was a fair degree of optimism. Now, what's happened since then? Basically, they've shut a few centres down very, very quietly. So my information is that there are no centres in, for example, Qingdao. I've contacted people who worked there on the official WSE website. There's still a centre there at Mayfair Square, but in reality, my information is that it's closed. So they've shut down a few centres. Now, how was sales performance in the back half of 2020? There are mixed messages. I think that my sources are basically telling me that sales performance was very bad. Not very bad, but it was below expectation. So it was below target. And even though they've said that they had a good month in December, I have a source that is a CC that says that wasn't actually true. Now, that's typical of a lot of companies. You know, they have a good year, they have a bad year. A lot of companies have been hit by COVID. Why is it seemingly becoming a much more serious situation for Wall Street English? So basically, I think in January they were told that they would be getting some half pays. So they'd be getting paid 50% at the beginning of the month and 50% at the start of the next month. So on the 9th of February, they were given a half pay, and then all employees were given a half pay. And then on the 1st of March, they were given another half pay. On the 9th of March, they were to be given another half pay. So starting to get into giving them half of their February pay after finishing all of their January pay. I know it sounds a bit complex, but basically the March 9th deadline, on the 9th of March, they were told that they weren't going to get anything and that they would get that on the 25th of March, possibly. So that's why I've got it together to sort of make this video, and they had a town hall meeting, which is, I guess, their way of announcing new information to their staff and trying to be collaborative. So I'm just going to start to go through that now. So these are some notes that my friend took in the meeting. So the first thing that it says is, and this is what the CEO Kedwards was saying, and this is what Peke was saying. So the market is changing due to population trends in China. So the population's getting older. So that's one idea. That's one reason in their mind why the market is more difficult now. The second point is, I've got about 20 or 30 lines here, but if you follow me along, I'll just go through it. People don't believe traditional advertising anymore due to social media and ratings websites. So I think that that's a pretty good point. Like, Chinese customers are much more savvy, and they don't just sort of see a sign and go in and consume it. They'll go onto the Chinese social media websites and they'll look at so in effect it acts sort of like a consumer watchdog in a way, because people are continually updating these websites, and it's really difficult to sort of game this system. Like, you can't necessarily just change people's opinions via any way. So yeah, and if you go onto those websites, I can't, I can read some simple Chinese, like I can read bathroom or I can read mountain or exit or something like that, but I can't just like go into a Chinese website and read it all. But if you do go into these websites and read them with a Chinese friend, these websites are basically saying that Wall Street English is dishonest, and that they are not a very good company to study with. So there's a lot of complaints on those websites. So that's an issue. The next thing, e-commerce. People are buying online because it's cheaper rather than in stores. So that's something that's been happening in China, which doesn't help schools that are like very much physical schools. COVID and the economy, it's been difficult for companies. Yep, so we've talked about that. They've acknowledged that. I think everybody acknowledges that. Market moving. The ESL market, according to these guys, is moving to a hybrid online-offline model. So all of this is pretty much like standard stuff that you would expect. Okay, now what they're saying is that there's three main issues for the company. So the first issue is 3 different owners. So they've had difficulty having a consistent strategy. And I would add to this that the 3 different owners, they basically just, so before the bank owned it, Pearson owned it, which was an English education company. And I think everybody just took cash out of it. After a student walks in the door and hands over their cash, once that cash is gone back to the mother company or back to the parent company, that student just becomes a debt. They have to be taught. The contract has to be completed, has to be executed or whatever. So it just becomes like a debt. So by taking all of the money out of the company, it was a really It was a really difficult thing. Now, two economies in China: factories, manufacturing, and face-to-face interaction industries are shrinking. So face-to-face is shrinking. National education policy getting tighter, more government supervision and intervention due to bad operators in the industry. So Wall Street's kind of separating themselves, and they're kind of saying, well, we're not the bad operators, we're the good guys, which is, I guess, what you would expect. But yeah, there's a lot more national government or provincial government. I guess it's coming from the central government. There's a lot more supervision of the education sector, and there's even talk, like as an extra thing that's beyond these notes. There's actually talk of the central government closing all of the training centers in China to give children more opportunity to have a social life and to play sports and to develop physically and mentally. So, you know, who knows if that will happen, but apparently in Chaoyang it's already happened. Okay, shorter courses sold recently, so nothing beyond 12 months and much cheaper. So Wall Street English has smaller amounts of revenue coming in, helping people achieve their goals rather than teach English. So they've said here that they're sort of trying to become like a goals company. So they're even admitting that they don't have a monopoly or even a very, I guess, effective like means of teaching English that's so much different or so much better than other companies. So that's interesting. Experimented with online and offline with products like VCoach. Big discount when they reopened in July last year. Raised prices twice since then. So they've sold these courses, but then they keep raising the prices. So they've gone up twice. Okay, now this is a big one. This is right into it. And I remember when I was a teacher, there was a girl. I used to call her Carmela, and she was a nice lady. She was a young girl, and she would organize finance for students. Now, Wall Street English used to help pay interest on students' loans through cooperating with the banks before COVID. Okay, that's over. So Wall Street's no longer involved in helping to finance the course costs for students. So that's been a big blow to the company as well. Mentioning about having trouble getting more investment. Okay, now it's getting into Pecky. So Pecky has put his own money in to recapitalize the business in July. Strategy was that costs were high, sales were low. So they expected costs to go down by closing centers, but closing centers in China, it costs a lot of money because you have to pay compensation to the landlords, you have to pay compensation to any employees that you're letting go. In an ideal world, they would just all resign, but in China, as I mentioned in another video, the laws really do favor employees. I mean, it's a socialist country. That's what you would expect. Revenue hasn't improved at all since business was reopened. It has been very hard to increase sales without going into details. That is a direct quote. It's been very hard to increase sales without going into details. So I suppose those details would be very complex and they'd be very much related to different areas of China, but basically that's a big one. Owe money to students who want refunds. Okay, so and the more centers you close and the more people get a sense of the business is going down, the more difficult it is to stop these refund cases. So refunds are getting more and more like of a problem. They were always a problem, but they're becoming more and more and more of a problem. So it says here a lot of the cash flow has been going towards refund. Half the debt has been cleared, which is good. So I think everybody would recognize that. But also that implies that half the debt still remains. So there's still a lot of money to repay. Rent is very high. Teaching costs are high. Admin, finance, IT, etc. It's all very high. Marketing and sales is very expensive. They have to spend money to get customers. And then they're trying to put an optimistic message on it. They've said, we're still selling contracts. We're getting cash every day, generating cash every day. Peke is apparently going to put more money in. They're also trying to find other investors. Now, this is a crucial point. 45 million RMB of costs per month, and 35 million RMB in sales per month. So they've said that there's a $10 million shortfall. So, or 10 million RMB shortfall, which is about $2 million Australian. So that's what they've said. I mean, companies aren't necessarily obliged to be honest to their own employees. I don't think so, but that's what they've said. So it could be worse than that, and it could be 1 or 2 thousand RMB out. They could have rounded figures up and rounded figures down. We don't know. Apparently, it says here as well that potential investors have set conditions to investment. So I guess what they're doing here, they're setting the context of like, we need investors, but the investors have said we have to close centres. So they're trying to sort of, I guess, impute some of the fault, or abrogate. I'm using big words now, or abrogate, or I guess just kind of separate themselves from that business of closing centres. They need to lower costs. They've got no expectation that sales will increase in the short term. And okay, so now this is getting into their plan. Cold calling isn't working. They want people coming in through social media. 20 to 30% reduction in rent for centres negotiated with landlords. Now, I don't know who these landlords are, but I've never met a landlord who has sort of said, "Oh, you're having a tough time. How about a reduction in rent of 30%?" I mean, I've never heard of that before. But who knows? New plan to bring down costs to meet realistic sales goals. So now they're talking about a 4-month plan. A 4-month plan from March to June. And their idea is that at June, costs will reflect what sales can achieve. But look, once you close centres and you start to make the business smaller, the revenue becomes smaller as well. It's not that simple that you can just reduce costs, because when a business begins to shrink, its presence, its revenue also begins to shrink. You can't cut the branches of an apple tree and expect it to produce the same amount of apples. But that's what they've told the staff. They're talking about changing sales and management, so I guess putting more pressure on their own people, focusing on cost reduction instead of sales growth. They're going to cut 30% of head office. They're talking about a need to simplify VVIP. VVIP was a thing that I was a part of, so it roughly stands for very, very important person. So it's sort of promoted as the elite English teaching branch. It's been fairly profitable, but it's also very expensive to run, because the teachers generally, have been paid quite a lot of overtime, and there's a large number of teachers in that team. And the salespeople who get those contracts, they also have expected that they will get a significant proportion of those contracts. They're not getting those contracts for free. Fewer people in centres recently. Now, this is one of the most ridiculous statements from this whole thing, because there's been the comment made that it's been great for students because they've had a lovely, quiet learning experience. So I don't know what that was. I think that must have just been a joke. They're trying to get inspiration from Wall Street English in other parts of Asia, so trying to run much smaller centres. They're talking about the need to experiment and keep experimenting until something works. They say that they're working on this 24/7 on finding investors and lowering costs. And they're saying that the senior managers, have taken a 50% pay cut. So, we don't know what their pay was before they took that big cut, but that's a pretty big cut. So look, that's all the information that we have. I guess at the 25th, on the 25th, we will know a bit more, but that's all we have so far. And I'll make another video and update the situation again in the future. And that's it. And look, I just also want to say, Wall Street English gave me an opportunity to have a job for 5 years. I'm very proud of that. And I don't bear them any ill will. And if I could wave a magic wand and make them all profitable again, I certainly would. So I wish them all the best, but this is a part of my channel, is keeping everybody updated on the situation, and I plan to do that. So thank you very much.